Hi everybody, thank you for coming. I'm sure there were a few people that are out and about last night, so your attendance at this relatively early hour for day 2 is very much welcome. The case for drug testing at events, I think it's going to be a really dynamic and interesting panel. IMS and AFEM have been ardent supporters of reform and providing a platform for debate and change. In 2015, we delivered the first panel of its type at a dedicated electronic music conference with Fiona, Steve Rolls and B. Traits. And I think we kind of set a tone, certainly within IMS and the broader industry in that panel, when we stated that drug testing isn't pro-drugs, it's anti-death, and it was a very bold statement, and one that in front of our eyes kind of went viral because we could see Twitter on a monitor down here, and it was just retweet, 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 and we're like, aha. So we found the phrase that worked. So I'm keen to see this panel as both a continuation from that discussion, but also a powerful next step, given how many people in the audience are promoters and DJs and agents and are all around the impacts of the topic. So before we start, if we could just get some introductions from yourselves as the panelists, if I could start, of course, with ladies first.
My name is Fiona Measham. I'm a Professor of Criminology at Durham University and also Director of The Loop.
John Drape, I'm Group Production Director of Broadwick Live, with the second biggest festival operator in the UK. I also run Ground Control Festival Production Company, 30 years in the industry. Early years were production manager at the Hacienda nightclub in Manchester.
Hi, I'm Freddie Fellows and I'm the founder of the Secret Garden Party.
Thanks everyone, and I'm Mark Lawrence. Fiona, if I could turn to you first, could you just describe how testing works, how the loop solution and how the technology works for those that don't know?
Sure, but have we got a clip we can show first? We were going to show the clip.
No.
Do we not have it? Oh, okay.
Unless you sent it in.
Yeah, they do have it.
Have you got a clip?
Yeah.
Then yes.
So slick.
The 700 people in this Bristol nightclub appear without a care in the world, but they are very vulnerable. Drugs in the UK are stronger than ever, stronger than they realise.
Thank you very much.
Motion nightclub uses sniffer dogs to turn people with drugs away.
I have to go back there, buddy.
But still, in November of last year, one 19-year-old died after taking ecstasy here. One of Motion's founders thinks enough is enough.
We're seeing more people end up in medical rooms, we're seeing more people go to hospital, and we're hearing more people dying.
So for Bristol, part of the solution is testing. This weekend, ITV News was given exclusive access to the first ever drugs test in a UK city centre.
What we're interested in here is being able to give them a guide to say, look, this tablet is crazy strong, you really need to be careful.
Crucially, this pop-up lab is supported by the police and the council. Members of the public bring their illegal drugs here for testing by chemists.
So for the MDMA, did you taste it?
Most of the samples are MDMA, a form of ecstasy. The strength of the drugs they find surprises even the experts.
Wow. Wow.
Wow, what?
This is a high purity sample.
Could it kill him?
The diplomatic answer is yes.
This man brought hallucinogenic drugs in for testing.
What do you hope this service will do for you?
Give me some clarity as to what I'm putting into my body, because it's good to know that, yeah.
All the drugs handed in are destroyed after testing.
Nothing we discuss today should be seen by you as a loophole of the event encouraging you to take drugs off facility.
And when they get the results, users must have a consultation to talk about their drug habits.
What about the risks involved with negative experiences?
I made some mistakes and I experienced the dark side of it.
Critics may claim this programme promotes drug use, but the organiser is clear. No drug use is safe.
When we talk to drug users, we say to them that the safest way to take drugs is not to take them at all. However, this is a pragmatic harm reduction service, so we accept that some people may take drugs, and we need to identify what's in circulation.
The fact that police are allowing this to happen may come as a surprise, but in the fight against drug deaths, they say they need new ideas.
But there's a bigger picture when it comes to the use of drugs. There's smaller uses of drugs, very low-level possession,
which can sometimes take quite a lot of time in terms of police officers dealing with them, rather than carrying on with tactics that have been tried for many years and haven't necessarily always had the greatest impact. It's time to try new things and look at different ways of doing things.
22-year-old student Joanna Burns died last year after taking MDMA on a night out. She was a bright student at Sheffield University. Her mother doesn't think testing would have saved her.
After hearing the pathologist report, there was nothing really different in the MDMA, nothing that anyone could have pointed to. It was the way that her body reacted to the MDMA, so any amount of drugs testing wouldn't have prevented her death.
2 other cities are on the verge of introducing drugs testing, but it is the most sensitive of debates: how to make illegal drugs less lethal. Allegra Stratton, ITV News, Bristol.
I'm glad we had that. So,
yes.
How does it actually technically work? What's the testing process?
Yeah, so people can bring a substance to be tested. We ask for 1 dose, so 1 pill or 1 small scoop of powder. They put it into a little baggie, as you saw in the clip, and then they come back about an hour later, and in the course of the hour we've conducted a whole range of tests, including Fourier transfer infrared spectroscopy, UV spectroscopy and a number of other tests to, as best as we can, identify what's in that substance. And then they come back and they have a counselling session with a healthcare professional who will talk to them about not just what the substance is, but also how that fits in perhaps with their own medical history, their previous drug use. So they get a very specific, individually tailored harm reduction package of advice. And then they go off and they have an opportunity to, if they want to, they can dispose of samples with us if they have further samples on them. But obviously we don't ask them specifically about that. But we can also then provide a disposal service with the police if they do happen to give us those samples.
And how much does the machine cost?
Yeah, it's not cheap. As you could see in the clip, there's a full pop-up lab with about £100,000 worth of equipment. And obviously technology is moving on, so we want to have the latest technology. So it's not cheap to get the lab in the first place, and it's not cheap to get the lab on site. But the better the equipment, the quicker and more accurate the test results can be.
That's a small price to pay to save lives. How does it compare to other models? Because in America, more often now you see companies like Dance Safe operating at some of the festivals. What's the difference between the service the Loop offers and the service that Dance Safe offers?
Yeah, so we have a full pop-up lab, and all of our volunteers are professionals. So the testing's done by PhD chemists, and the counselling session is by doctors, nurses, or substance misuse practitioners, i.e. drugs workers in the UK. In some other countries, including the States, they have peer-to-peer advice services which have a role to play, but obviously they're not professional chemists, doctors or nurses, and the testing that they tend to use is the sort of the reagent kits that people can buy, the little mini self-testing kits, which are very limited in terms of what they can do. They can broadly say what the main ingredient is in a substance, but they couldn't tell you, for example, if you had very strong, very potent adulterants, which are a real concern at the moment in relation to drug-related deaths. I should say, in the UK, we've got the highest drug-related death rate on record and also the highest in Europe. So we're really concerned about fentanyl analogues in opiates, and a big concern last summer at festivals was pentolone analogues, which were being missold as MDMA. Those sorts of things wouldn't necessarily be picked up by these self-testing kits.
What do you think is an underlying cause for that high rate of death in the UK versus Europe? Is there something unique about UK consumption or behaviour?
I think there's a whole bunch of things going on, really. One of them is that in Britain we like to binge at weekends, and we do that with alcohol, we do that with drugs. There are other concerns in relation to drug services and the cuts to drug services which have had an impact. And I think also it's about access to prompt medical treatment in terms of overdose as well. So there's a whole bundle of things happening.
Yeah. I think one of the things that when we met up, I think it was a year ago in London, really surprised me was the funding model for the Loop. How is it funded, and how are the staff and the installation paid for?
Yeah, so it's staffed by volunteers, but as I said before, the pop-up lab itself is pretty expensive. So we do charge to be going on site, so we get a fee which is usually paid for by the festival, but not always. So it could be a consortium, including the local public health. It could be the police as well as the festival. So we're looking at different funding models, really, for different events. And now, as that clip showed, we've just introduced it to city centres, and that's being funded by a consortium, which includes nightclubs, and the nightclubs are donating a proportion that's relative to their capacity. So smaller clubs will pay a smaller amount. One of the ideas about having the testing in a local drug service is not to have it in a nightclub, so it doesn't identify or expose or stigmatise a particular club or a particular event, but that anybody can go and use the service, and therefore we want the whole community to fund it as well. And we have a crowdfunder at the moment to be helping to raise some money for the equipment.
Well, let's hope that a large number of people that operate in dance music can connect to that crowdfunding campaign, because I think it's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's interesting has been that we have had some support from DJs that their managers have then withdrawn, so it's still seen as so controversial. So we're very keen to encourage everybody in the industry to support us, including the DJs' managers.
Noted. One last question for me before we move on. I imagine, with a tiny sliver of understanding of UK law, that the authorisation process is complicated. What stages do you have to go through to get on-site testing approved?
It's really complicated, as John could attest as well, because he's been part of this process. We have to get the support of the police, first and foremost, then public health, local authority, licensing, and obviously the event as well. And I've spent years go through those negotiations. Sometimes it's easier depending on the local politics, but it's usually very time consuming. But probably one other thing to mention, though, is that now we've been operating this for 2 years, we've got really positive results, and that's helped in terms of negotiating with new events. We can say an independent medical report at one of the festivals last year said there was a reduction by 25% in drug-related incidents on site. So we can use that as a lever for introducing it in other places. But also in terms of the cost of it as well, is that the idea is we don't just save lives, but we save money for events because they don't have to deal with all of the issues in relation to drug-related problems on site.
Amazing, thank you. Freddie, if I could turn to you. For years, I used to have a fear of missing out over Secret Garden Party because I never got my act together to go, and was always intensely jealous of everyone that came back telling me how amazing it was. So I apologise for never going. But could you just tell everybody a little bit about Secret Garden Party? What were its objectives? What was its culture? Because it was very unique.
We started Secret Garden Party, or I started the Secret Garden Party in 2003, mainly as a reaction against the rave culture, and trying to open up a less monotheistic approach to music and these kind of events. We are to date the largest wholly independent and unsponsored event in the UK. We obviously finished our last event last year. But these qualities of independence is what put us in a unique position to be the first event in England to actually offer this, to break this drugs testing mold and enable it to happen. And we were, I was very proud to be the thin end of hopefully a large wedge.
Absolutely. And forgive me for not knowing off the top of my head, but why did you bring an end to Secret Garden Party?
As I said, we were the largest independent and unsponsored event, something which was getting more and more threatened. I think my glib reply was, we got to 15 years old. If we'd been a year older, we'd have been legal to fuck. And no one's going to fuck my baby.
I'm not sure that's going to make its way through the social media filter. And John, if I can turn to you for ground control and just a potted history, when was it set up? Which locations? Where do you operate? What are the events?
So currently I look after 12 festivals in the UK, and they range from Parklife in Manchester, 80,000 people, 2-day, big focus on electronic music, right down to smaller shows such as Truck Festival in Oxfordshire, 15,000 people, 3-day camping festival. So a wide range of festivals. And I've been operating within the festival marketplace going back 20 years, when we started snowbombing in Austria, and previous to that I worked within the venue and nightclub environment with the Hacienda. And, you know, throughout that period, you know, one of the biggest challenges, you know, has been drugs. And unfortunately, during that whole period, I've had to deal with a number of fatalities at festivals and at venues. And it's off the back of that, you know, and the impact that a fatality can have, you know, on a site, operationally, emotionally, you know, it is significant. And throughout that period, we've just been looking at what can we do to try and mitigate that. There must be more we can do, looking at harm reduction. And that's where, you know, we started developing back-of-house testing originally with Fiona and the Loop. So before we saw that front-of-house testing, or mass testing as it's known, we were trying to get intelligence on our festival sites about what drugs were in circulation, so we could try and inform and communicate effectively with our audience, just to try and give us that little bit more intelligence of what's going on. So that sort of paved the way. That's sort of the way to introduce stakeholders such as the police, licensing authorities, public health, etc., into the notion of drug testing. What can it bring to the table? And then the natural next step was then to take it front of house, so then you're in dialogue with the customers or consumers.
Yeah, amazing. And Freddie, if I could turn to you, why did you choose to both adopt and fight for on-site testing? I mean, it was an incredibly pioneering thing to do, and some would argue a very brave thing to do.
Well, I think in the simplest terms, I honestly and profoundly believe it was the right thing to do. We've been doing the garden party 15 years. I've been involved in events for longer than that, and in the 20 plus years of doing this, this is the first meaningful change in harm reduction policy that I've seen in our industry. And I think it's slightly disgraceful that we've had to wait this long to change anything. And
what were the measurable or observable impacts on the event once you introduced testing?
I mean, for me, I thought they were massive. We were able to identify some incredibly dangerous substances being sold as cocaine. I think there was some anti-malarial methylquine and chloroquine being sold as cocaine. I have no idea what happens if you snort that, but I can't imagine it's good for you. We went from the sublime, you know, the ridiculous or the horrible to the sublime. We also found some pills that were 100% concrete. I kind of have to take my hat off to the guy who made those, because puts a new word to the phrase pinger. But I mean, on a serious note, a quarter of the drugs that were tested were that people decided not to take the rest of it, or and in the case of the antimalarials, actually led to convictions of the amoral arsehole who was selling that. And most importantly, I felt it gave us a very positive response from the audience. And instead of trying to look after people who felt they were, because they had been breaking the law, were in a contrary position to the hosts of the event, it put us much more, as a perception, on the same side as our audience, and therefore much more approachable to approach for help when they needed it, which is the most important thing.
I mean, that is exactly the point here. It's that change in policy and change in approach which makes all the difference. Whether you're doing the drug testing on site or not, it's changing that policy of, traditionally it's been zero tolerance. There's no drugs here, there's nothing to see, it's not going on in this festival. I mean, that's a fucking joke, you know what I mean? No matter what you do, no matter how many sniffer dogs you put on a site, no matter how vigorous your searches are, and we do very vigorous searches, and we search staff, and we search security, and we search traders, but, you know what I mean, as soon as people wake up, you know what I mean, smell the coffee and realise that there's drugs on that festival site, then you can start doing something about it. And one of the things that we had to change was that approach. So, and that meant a rewrite of drug policy. So now we adopted what we call the 3 Ps. So the first one is prevent, and we do our damnedest to prevent drugs getting onto site. We are certainly not encouraging the use of drugs. Drugs are, highly dangerous. So we do our damnedest to prevent them getting onto our festival sites. However, we accept the fact that they will, no matter what we do, get onto our festival sites. But we will pursue. So the next P is pursue. So we'll take a targeted and measured approach to pursuing drug dealing on site in particular. And we might have a number of different tools in our box to do that, from plainclothes security, CCTV, using intel from other festival goers, etc. But the most important P is protect. And how do we protect our customers? And that's where drug testing is a part of a wider protection policy that you'll have in place. And part of that will be medical provision, part of that will be welfare provision, but part of that will be having that dialogue with your audience about harm reduction and key messaging. And once you stop having that zero tolerant approach where we don't have drugs, we're not talking about them, then you can start having a sensible dialogue. Because the people that are consuming recreational drugs at festivals are not hardened drug users. You know, they may use them, you know, occasionally during the year. When they go to the festival, there is a sense of escapism. Their use of drugs might increase. They might be buying them from a supply line where they're not used to. So it's very, very important, our view is, that we have a sensible dialogue with those customers.
And I'm sorry, I agree. I mean, I think what's important to remember about the zero tolerance is policies such as that have very little provable effect on whether someone takes a drug. That's much more to do with their social dynamic and position. However, such policies can have a massive effect on whether that individual suffers harm as a result of taking them. And I think that's, you know, what to remember. It's like criminalizing risky behavior is only one way to reduce harm, and not always a very appropriate way.
Yeah, and I guess building from that, if I was to, very difficult for me to adopt the opposite, the devil's advocate position, would be zero tolerance means zero testing. So aren't you just endorsing consumption? No. I mean, I think it's one important thing to remember that it is in how many years, 50 plus years of the war on drugs, it has had zero effect on reducing people who have tried and habitually take drugs. In fact, they've gone up massively. Basically, zero tolerance is not only ineffective, but worse, in my mind, it actually involves putting the young at risk in order to pander to someone else's belief who's not even at the event. And I think that is despicable. It's irresponsible, even.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're going to be zero tolerant, you should be ejecting people who've taken drugs who might have ended up in welfare or in medical. You know, if you're going to adopt it to the strict letter of the law, then that's what you should be doing. And if you're going to be doing that, then people aren't going to go to medical and welfare, so deaths are going to increase.
Fiona, coming back to you, has on-site testing created any subsequent problems? Has it created problems for the events or for you? Has it kind of put you up against the law anywhere? And what's the friction been?
You know, we're balancing on quite a knife edge legally. I mean, it has to be said, because at the end of the day, we're testing and handling controlled drugs. Well, they might be, of course, they could be concrete or malaria tablets. So we only do it with the goodwill and the invitation and the support of the police. That's our starting point, and we wouldn't even bother doing it without that. But at the moment, we're very lucky in the UK because a lot of police forces do want this. And I get, you know, I'm responding to the invitation of the police forces to be on site. So we've got some interesting, quite radical regional police forces. The bigger question really then is the central government position, which at the moment is I guess, watching and waiting. And I've got some meetings with the government coming up, so we'll see about that. But so we've got regional support from a lot of forces, but centrally from the government, not yet. But then this is a central government that doesn't support quite a lot of evidence-based drug policy decisions, including drug consumption rooms, which have been very successfully proved around the world. So that's perhaps not a surprise. But I would want to say that drug safety testing, or multi-agency testing as we call it, isn't necessarily tied to one particular policy regime. You know, this is really about, you know, anybody could be ripped off by dealers, and so it's important that they have an opportunity to test substances that they might be planning to ingest. And in relation to your point about are we encouraging drug use or increasing it, we're very clear that we're not encouraging or condoning drug use. Everybody who comes to our service has already bought the substance. They've already gone through that process of identifying a dealer, and they're planning on taking it. So if we can reduce even some use by identifying the contaminants or adulterants, then actually we're reducing, not increasing drug use, as well as reducing drug-related problems on site. And interestingly, 9 in 10 people who use our service have never spoken to a healthcare professional before. So our idea is that the testing is the hook to get people in, and they can then engage in a dialogue with a healthcare professional, which they do, and we're getting very positive feedback from service users afterwards, saying that they really appreciate that opportunity, because a lot of young people might have problems with drugs. They don't want to talk to their family GP, they don't want to go to the hospital, they don't want to get it on their medical records because it's illegal, it's criminal behaviour. But if they get the opportunity, they do have things to discuss, they've got questions to ask. So to have professionals on site providing them with that opportunity, we know people actually do take that up, because we have queues of up to 2 or 3 hours on site of people who want to use the service.
Incredible. Either Freddie or John, were there any unforeseen benefits after you installed drug testing at your events? Were there impacts that you didn't plan for?
A trip to Ibiza?
Good answer. Always a winner. You know, I mean, did it create any economic benefits? Did it create a loyalty from your audience, your fans? I mean, has it got more than just harm reduction as a benefit?
I mean, the harm reduction, you know, clearly that's the main drive behind it. But I think, you know, wider from that, you know, it developed a much closer relationship with the police forces where we're operating it. You know what I mean? So our, you know, in the UK, there can be an us and them relationship with your local police force, with your local licensing authority. You know, in the case of Kendall Calling, where we adopted it the same year as Freddie launched it, you know, that was in the context of having a fatality. 21-year-old lad lost his life the year before from taking ecstasy on site. You know, we felt that we were running a very safe festival. That view was shared by Cumbrick and Stabulary. Clearly, it wasn't safe enough because someone had lost their life. We did a lot of soul searching alongside the police, which led to us adopting, you know, the front of the mass testing. And off the back of that now, our relationship with the police force, you know, is incredibly close, which just leads to a better event. So there's that element. But then clearly, you know, the wider, you know, reputational damage or reputational factor of the festival, you know what I mean? You know, you could have gone from losing trust in your audience, or certainly the parents of your audience, you know, they're not going to let little Johnny go to Kendall Courtland because somebody died there. You know, we had the opposite effect. We were seen as being very proactive, very responsible, and innovative by adopting testing.
Yeah.
I was just going to add to that. We did a follow-up survey with the people who came and used our testing service last year, because in my day job, because this isn't my day job, in my day job I'm an academic, and one of the things that we hadn't expected but really surprised us was that even after having gone through the testing process once, people were more inquisitive about what was in the drugs, and it was almost like going through that process had challenged that fatalism that you buy illegal drugs, you don't know what's in them, you take them anyway, but that actually they can find out. And they said that even just having their drugs tested once, that they were looking up things on the internet more, they were discussing the contents of drugs more with friends, they were sharing information and advice, and it seemed to kickstart a curiosity amongst users to take a bit more responsibility themselves for what they were putting in their bodies.
Your point earlier about politics or politicians flying in the face of proof. What's the government policy in the UK towards recreational drugs, and how does that differ from Holland and Portugal and Germany, for instance?
Well, the current government position, particularly in relation to testing, is that drugs are illegal because they're dangerous, and therefore you shouldn't take them because they're illegal, and therefore if you come to any harm, it's your own fault because you took illegal drugs. And that's sort of the loop that they go around. Most of the focus of services, drug services, is on problem drug use, on heroin and crack users, daily dependent injecting users, and the links with drug-related crime. So there's very little funding for recreational drug use, for harm reduction services, and that was one of the reasons why we set up the Loop 5 years ago, was because we thought more should be done. And so myself and a friend of mine who's a DJ and promoter, who is usually at this event, we thought that if no one else was doing it, that we would. And we've now got more than 500 volunteers, and we're going to be at 10 festivals this summer. So there's obviously a demand for it.
And has anything changed in central government or even in the media, actually, since Fabric, since all the well-documented kind of arguments around Fabric's closure? Did that act as a catalyst, or did it just kind of embolden the government to lock down?
I think you're right. I think it did act as a catalyst. I think in terms of building allegiances between industry, police, and also service providers as well. So I'm now working with Birmingham Police, and we're hoping to introduce drug safety testing in Birmingham, where they had a couple of fatalities. Unfortunately, I think London will probably be the last place to get it, and that's because it's so close to the Home Office, to the government. But lots of other cities are in discussions with us now. So things are looking really hopeful in the regions, if not in the capital.
Presumably it'd be really embarrassing if someone that worked at the Home Office was seen trotting over the road to the testing station. Freddie, as a member of society and as a promoter, what do you think needs to change in the UK to allow us to be, speaking as a Brit, to be progressive?
I've been a very vocal supporter of Transform's work and standing up with the Garden Party and saying that prohibition has done more harm than drugs since 1963. And it's a very, a position of ethos that we've stuck to. I think we need to readdress our approach to drugs. I think the circular argument that we're just hearing from the government of why are they illegal because they're harmful, why are they harmful because they're illegal, is depressing that intelligent people still produce that as a logical argument. One of the things we've got to start understanding that we're up against is human beings have been taking drugs longer than they've been human beings. We've evolved alongside these plant chemicals that a lot of these drugs either are or imitate. It is insane to imagine that a prohibition is going to stop this or protect any harm. What we need to start doing is actually encouraging a much more healthy relationship with this. Actually the way tobacco has been controlled and limited over the last 10 years is a success story for how drugs can actually be controlled and looked after, and people's health can benefit as a result from a more mature and proactive approach from the government. One of the best protections against drug use being associated with risk-taking is to allow positive cultures to spring up around it that don't encourage overindulgence, but actually celebrate moderation.
Absolutely, and it's an emerging theme in the industry, and certainly in this conference, that balance and well-being are critical, especially in electronic music, which is inevitably based to a degree, but not exclusively, and aligned with drug culture. John, just turning to you, can you, I guess you're going to kind of say your own events, but is there a role model of best practice or an objective for best practice for promoters that you could say this is how the perfect event should be set up in terms of harm reduction?
Well, it's interesting. I've been working on a campaign called Festival Safe, launched in the UK, because I think one of the things that festivals in general have a problem about is talking about harm reduction in the very wider sense of the word. So we're not just necessarily talking about drugs, we're talking everything from sexual assault, sexual crime, even fire safety in campsites and that sort of thing. So we've developed this tool for anybody in the industry, predominantly in the UK, because it's most relevant to UK festivals. And the idea, has been based on a very successful harm reduction campaign that exists in Holland called Celebrate Safe. Difference is that's funded by the central government. Festival Safe has been a little bit of a labour of love by me. We've got some money off Global to fund it. Because I think one of the things that festivals do struggle with is communicating harm reduction effectively before the show. So we really wanted to create a central portal where, you know, first-time festival goers, you know, parents of festival goers with kids, etc., could find relevant information, but more importantly, be signposted to more in-depth information. So there's links to the Loop about drugs. You know, there's links to, you know, drink aware about alcohol, etc. So that exists. I think, you know, within the UK, you know, we are all striving to make our industry a much safer environment, you know, and you know, there is progress being made across the board, you know, around these conversations around drugs, and certainly in locations where previously you could never imagine it happening. So, you know, Birmingham, as Fiona mentioned, you know, they were trying to, you know, well, in fact, they almost succeeded taking licenses off venues in Birmingham because there were fatalities. Now they're looking at the harm reduction. They're looking at the testing. So there's definitely progress.
And Fiona, just before we move to questions, how can the electronic music industry drive change with you or for you at the Loop?
Well, I think the two main things obviously will be vocal support in terms of across social media, and the second most obvious thing will be money, because it's not cheap at all. But as I've said before, what I think is it's about spending money earlier on and saving money down the line in relation to this, as well as, you know, it being a more positive experience, whatever that event or club or festival might be. So I think it's win-win, really. We call our testing multi-agency safety testing, and that's because we absolutely foreground that it should be a multi-agency partnership, and that's very much with the events industry as well.
Fantastic. And what can everyone in this room do to help? Where can they go and find a way to support the Loop?
Okay, so we've got our website, which is wearetheloop.org. And on there we've got our crowdfunder, and we've got a big button saying donate please. That will be the best.
Amazing, thank you. Listen, we've got about 5 minutes left for questions, so if anybody wants to ask anybody a question, please put their hand up now and we'll get a microphone out. Yes, good. And when you ask the question, can you just tell us your name and what you do or where you're from?
My name's Thea. I'm a definite Secret Garden Party fan. I've just got a job at working for Dawn and Andy at Pikes and Ibiza Rocks. And I'm a good friend of Hattie's, who works with Transform. Apparently Spain, I don't know if any of you know, apparently they're much further ahead with this. As usual, England's massively behind and in denial. But I wondered if I don't know if you know that or anybody knew.
Yeah, there's a European network called TEDI, which is Trans-European Drugs Information Network, and we're a part of that. And Energy Control, which is the Spanish testing organisation, they're a part of it as well. They use slightly different technology, and they've been going a little bit longer, but I think they probably they're not in as many events as we will be this summer.
Thank you. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Brilliant. In that case, we must have perfectly laid it out. Listen, thank you very much indeed for raising awareness and giving such incredible information on what all of you have done and do. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.